Well, I'll introduce myself. My name is Lucinda Nord, and I work at a firm out of Chicago that works with nonprofits and colleges around the country. And then I also teach right here at IU Indy, a couple blocks away.
Good morning, my name is Dina Martinez and I work for the state of Indiana as our International Business Development and Engagement Senior Manager. And a proud We the People alum, so I know exactly what it feels like to be in your shoes and just take some deep breaths and you'll have so much fun.
All right, so what we'd like to do is have you introduce yourselves and then we'll get started with Unit 3 question.
For Unit 3, I'm Owen Douglas, Andrew Lorenzen,
Madeline Saxma,
Avery Simon from Kidder Middle School, Gary, Indiana.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so you know what we're about to do. Just like you were expert witnesses at a congressional hearing, we're going to call on you to answer some questions, all right? And so I'll read the full question before you make it begin. So Congress has formed this congressional committee on how power is divided among the 3 branches of government. So you're going to testify on these questions. How did the framers use separation of powers and checks and balances to limit the powers of government? Give examples of checks and balances at work today. Give examples of the use of federalism to limit power. Do you think the Congress should have the power to pass a bill over the president's veto? Why or why not? And do you think the Supreme Court should have the power to declare a law passed by Congress unconstitutional? Why or why not? And you may begin.
Hello, and thank you for having us. We are so excited to present you Unit 3.
The framers used separation of powers to limit the power of government. They did this so that the government couldn't act like a king and have unlimited power. The government was split into 3 parts, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. By assigning different jobs to each branch, the legislative making laws, the executive enforcing the laws, and the judicial interpreting the laws, the framers aimed to prevent any one branch from gaining excessive power and potentially becoming too powerful. The framers also created a system of checks and balances, so that the government branches couldn't overpower any other branches. This process lets each branch check and potentially stop other branches from having too much power. Some examples of checks and balances at work today are that the legislative branch could take a judicial member out of office, and the judicial branch could take a member of Congress out of office. More examples include when the president vetoes a bill that the legislative branch makes, or when the judicial branch uses its power of judicial review, which is when the judicial branch declares a law unconstitutional. This system of checks and balances has many layers. For example, the legislative branch can still override the presidential veto if the bill returns to Congress and gets at least 2/3 vote in both houses. One recent event of checks and balances is the Judges Act, also known as the Judicial Understaffing Delayed Getting Emergency Solved Act of 2024. On December 23rd, former President Joe Biden vetoed a law passed by Congress, but it was never challenged after the president vetoed it. Some additional examples of checks and balances at work today are when the legislative branch checks the Supreme Court's decision by passing constitutional amendments. The most recent constitutional amendment was the 27th Amendment, which was ratified on May 7, 1992. This amendment prevents members of Congress from granting themselves pay raises during the current session.
In addition to limiting power for checks and balances, we also limit government power through federalism. In a federal system, government divides power between the state and national government. Some of the powers of the federal government are declaring and conducting war, controlling trade between states, creating post offices, creating federal courts, taxing and spending, and coining money. Some of the powers the state government has are creating public schools, making road and traffic laws, protecting public health and safety, conducting elections, and making laws regulating marriage and divorce. The powers of both the state and federal governments are collecting taxes, providing for the health and welfare of people, building roads, creating lower courts, and borrowing money. The Supremacy Clause in Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution generally states that the federal Constitution and federal law take precedence over the state law. It prevents states from interfering with the national government's use of constitutional powers. However, that same clause prohibits the national government from making laws that take away power from the state governments. For example, it prohibits the federal government from vetoing state laws before the law takes effect.
The Constitution grants Congress the power to override a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, allowing a bill to become a law despite the president's disapproval. If 2/3 of both houses, at least 357 people, think the law would be right for the people, it will become a law. This is explained in Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2. If the president could stop the law from happening, they would have too much power. The framers created separation of powers so no branch would have too much power. They did this because they didn't want a strong branch to be like the king. Allowing Congress to have the power to pass a bill over the president's veto ensures that the president, who is head of the executive branch, does not have more power than the other branches. One time the president vetoed a law and it was passed by Congress was with President Trump in 2020. Trump vetoed the bill on December 23rd, the House overrode it on December 28th, and the Senate on January 1st, 2021. This law dealt with how much money to spend on the military and what to spend it on. Being able to override a presidential veto is one way to ensure that one branch does not have more power than the other branches. The judicial branch also plays a role in separation of powers.
The Supreme Court has the power to declare a law unconstitutional. If Congress passes a bill into a law, the Supreme Court has a legal right to see if it is unconstitutional. And if it is, they can declare it unconstitutional and nullify the law. This is one of the Supreme Court's most important jobs. The power of judicial review ensures that even Congress follows the rule of law. An example of this is from 2021 of the case California versus Texas. Texas believed that since Congress had dropped the fine for not having insurance to zero, this made the Affordable Care Act unenforceable. This would cause the state to pay more for their medical coverage without receiving any additional money from the federal government. Because Texas failed to prove that this was causing harm to others, the Supreme Court said that the ACA was constitutional, meaning that the ACA stayed as it was. If Congress had already passed a law because they thought it would be for the people, good law for the people, that should be good enough. However, the Supreme Court judges are experts on the Constitution and have the job of ensuring that no laws that are made that go against the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. Thank you for listening to our speech. We hope that you have enjoyed our Unit 3 presentation, and we hope that you have enjoyed our presentation. We hope you would like to have us back again soon.
So we have some questions for you. So you were talking about all these different checks and balances, and so how did cases get to the Supreme Court?
Cases get to the Supreme Court through a somewhat long process. They start as a small problem or issue, and they stay at a local court, and then they start to build their way up, and if it's a big enough issue or problem at the time, they can find their way to the Supreme Court.
Like my colleague was saying, the problem might be small, and the two sides might be fighting, and one might lose, and they might appeal to a higher court to see if they can win.
It's the first Friday of the month, 11 o'clock. This is what happens. So just ignore this is our normal test siren. So apologies. Anything else on how cases get to the Supreme Court?
It also depends on the intensity of the case.
Okay.
If it's a higher case like a murder, then that should be appealed, but if it's only like a speeding ticket, that should only be stayed at a local court.
Okay.
So keeping in the vein of discussing the Supreme Court and how important they are, right? Shouldn't Supreme Court justices be elected instead of appointed? And why? Tell me why you think so or don't think so.
I believe Supreme Court justices should be elected because if they're doing good and if they're doing good, we can re-elect them. But if they're not and they don't appeal like they do now, then they will keep doing bad until they retire or die.
I disagree with my colleague. I believe that the president should appoint them because the president will choose good judges and justices instead of picking bad ones, so he'll know which ones to pick and which ones not to pick.
I also disagree because when you are elected, you have terms and you can only do a certain amount of terms. But when you're appointed, you can run for life or until you choose to retire. So if they're really good, I would prefer to have them appointed because then they could stay longer. And if they were elected, then they could only stay for a certain amount of time.
So let's change gears a little, and you talked a little bit about the sort of the presidential veto as a check and balance on Congress and how Congress can override. Does the president have other powers?
I believe the president has other powers. Some of these powers are they can declare war.
Mm-hmm.
Like my colleague said, they can do other things. They can also, kind of like we were just talking about, they can appoint people for the Supreme Court.
So, do you think that our president should be elected by popular vote, or should they continue going through the electoral college?
I believe the president should be elected by popular vote because we the people, meaning the power comes from the people, and if the people are electing the president, then we should have the direct power to choose who it is.
Well, give yourselves and the rest of people a round of applause.